The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as cars moved steadily along the quiet suburban roads of Willow Creek. It was just another evening for most. Kids playing outside, neighbors chatting over fences, and families preparing dinner. But for one woman, this night would change everything. Maya had just finished a long shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. She loved her job, even though it could be exhausting. Taking care of patients gave her a sense of purpose, and she always made sure to give her best, no matter how tired she felt. Tonight, however, all she wanted was to get home to her kids. They were waiting for her, probably already asking their dad what was taking her so long. As she drove through the familiar streets, her thoughts drifted between work and home. She mentally ticked off the things she needed to do before bed. Check. Homework? Pack lunches for tomorrow? Maybe squeeze in a quick call to her mom? Life was busy, but she wouldn't trade it for anything. Her family meant everything to her. She slowed down as she approached the intersection of Maple Street and Elm Avenue. The light turned yellow as she eased to a stop, checking her rearview mirror out of habit. That's when she saw them flashing blue and red lights reflecting off her car. Her heart skipped a beat. At first, she wasn't sure why she'd been pulled over. She glanced at her speedometer. Nope, she hadn't been speeding. Had she forgotten to signal earlier? Or maybe her taillight was out? Whatever it was, she decided to stay calm. After years of hearing stories about traffic stops gone wrong, especially for black drivers, she knew how important it was to remain composed. Pulling over onto the shoulder, she took a deep breath. Stay calm, she whispered to herself, gripping the steering wheel tightly. She rolled down her window and placed both hands where they could easily be seen. Just like she'd heard experts recommend on TV, every little detail mattered in moments like these. A police officer walked up to her car, his boots crunching softly against the pavement. Maya looked up and met his gaze. He seemed stern, almost intimidating, with a serious expression that didn't soften even when he asked for her license and registration. She nodded politely, reaching slowly into the glove compartment to grab the documents. Is there a problem? Officer? She asked, trying to sound friendly despite the knot forming in her stomach. You were swerving back there, he said abruptly, shining a flashlight into her car. Maya frowned, swerving. She hadn't noticed anything unusual about her driving. Still, she nodded again, keeping her tone respectful. I'm sorry if I did. I'll make sure to pay more attention. But the officer didn't seem satisfied. Instead, he leaned closer, sniffing the air dramatically. Do you have any idea why I stopped you? He asked, his voice sharp now. Maya shook her head. No, sir. I don't think I did anything wrong. He hesitated for a moment, then said, I smell marijuana in your car. Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. Marijuana? She didn't smoke, let alone carry drugs in her vehicle? That's impossible, she replied firmly. There's nothing like that in here. The officer didn't look convinced. His tone grew colder. Step out of the car, please. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was just a regular person trying to get home to her family. Why was this escalating so quickly? Reluctantly, she opened the door and stepped out, keeping her movements deliberate and slow. The cool evening air hit her face, but it did little to ease the tension building inside her. She locked eyes with the officer, hoping to convey that she wasn't a threat. But his demeanor remained rigid, unyielding. As she stood there, hands still visible, she couldn't help but think about all the news reports she'd seen. Stories of routine traffic stops turning into something far worse. Her mind raced with questions. Was this going to be one of those nights? Would she end up another statistic? She pushed the thought away, reminding herself to stay focused. Backup arrived soon after, adding to the growing unease. Another officer joined the scene, watching silently from a distance. Maya tried to ignore the weight of their stares, focusing instead on breathing evenly. But the situation was spiraling out of control faster than she could process. Then came the moment that changed everything. The original officer spotted something in the passenger seat, a small wooden box containing prescription medication for her son. To him, it looked suspicious. To Maya, it was just a container holding life-saving pills for her child. Before she could explain, the officer lunged toward the car, his hand hovering near his holster. In that instant, fear gripped Maya like never before. Time seemed to slow down as she reached into her purse, not for a weapon, but for her phone. She wanted to record the interaction, to protect herself in case things got worse. But the officer misinterpreted her movement, drawing his gun and shouting commands that only heightened her panic. What started as a simple traffic stop had turned into something unimaginable. And as the seconds ticked by, neither Maya nor the officers realized just how much this encounter would impact not only their lives but also the entire community. As the officer stepped closer to the car, his presence loomed large. Maya could feel her heart pounding in her chest like a drumbeat she couldn't silence. Every instinct told her to stay calm, but the tension in the air was suffocating. She stood there, hands still raised slightly, trying to keep her breathing steady. Her mind raced with questions. Why was this happening? What had she done wrong? And most importantly, how could she make this stop? The officer's voice cut through her thoughts again, sharper this time. "Did you hear me? Step back from the vehicle?" His tone left no room for negotiation. Maya nodded quickly, taking a small step backward as instructed. She didn't want to argue or provoke him further. All she wanted was to get through this moment without anything escalating. But then came the accusation that made her blood run cold. "I smell marijuana," he said firmly, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the inside of her car. Maya froze, her mind struggling to process what he'd just said. Marijuana? That wasn't possible. She didn't use drugs, let alone carry them around in her car. The accusation felt absurd, almost surreal. "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to sound composed. "There's nothing illegal in my car." She hoped her words would reassure him, but instead they seemed to have the opposite effect. The officer's expression hardened even more, and he gestured sharply for her to move away from the vehicle. Maya's stomach churned with anxiety. She glanced toward the wooden box sitting innocently on the passenger seat, the same box that held her son's prescription medication. To her, it was just a container filled with pills meant to help her child manage his epilepsy. But to the officer, it looked suspicious. Its plain design and unlabeled surface made it seem out of place, something that didn't belong in an ordinary traffic stop scenario. Before Maya could explain, the situation shifted dramatically. The officer leaned into the car, reaching past her to grab the box. In that split second, everything changed. Maya saw movement near his holster, a flash of black metal catching the dim light of the street lamp above them. Her mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario. Was he going to draw his weapon? Was she in danger? Fear surged through her body like a tidal wave. Instinct took over, overriding logic and reason. Without thinking, she reached into her purse not for a gun, but for her phone. She wanted to record the interaction, to document what was happening in case things spiraled further out of control. It was a reflex born out of years of hearing stories about unfair treatment during police encounters. She knew how important evidence could be, but the officer misinterpreted her actions completely. Seeing her hand disappear into her bag, he reacted instantly, drawing his gun and shouting, "Show me your hands now." His voice echoed loudly in the quiet evening, shattering the fragile calm that had briefly settled over the scene. Maya froze, caught between fear and confusion. Her brain struggled to catch up with the rapid-fire events unfolding around her. One moment, she was simply trying to explain herself. The next, she found herself staring down the barrel of a gun. Her breath hitched in her throat and her vision blurred momentarily as adrenaline coursed through her veins. Backup officers arrived at the scene, their arrival adding another layer of chaos to the already tense situation. Flashing lights illuminated the area, casting eerie shadows across the pavement. Maya felt trapped, surrounded by figures whose faces were obscured by the glare of headlights and strobing red and blue beams. Each new voice that joined the fray only heightened her sense of dread. One of the backup officers, a woman, hung back slightly, observing the scene with visible concern. Unlike her colleague, she seemed hesitant to escalate the confrontation further. Her eyes darted between Maya and the original officer as if weighing the situation carefully. For a brief moment, Maya allowed herself to hope that someone might intervene, might step in to diffuse the tension before it got worse. But hope was fleeting. The original officer remained unyielding, his focus locked squarely on Maya. He continued, barking commands, his tone growing increasingly aggressive with each passing second. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he shouted, his finger resting lightly on the trigger of his weapon. Maya complied, raising her hands higher, palms open and empty. Her phone slipped from her grasp, clattering harmlessly onto the asphalt. The low dot time seemed to stretch endlessly, each heartbeat echoing like thunder in her ears. Maya's mind raced with conflicting emotions, fear, anger, frustration, and desperation all swirling together in a chaotic storm. She tried to speak, to explain herself, but her voice faltered under the weight of the moment. All she could manage was a shaky plea. "Please, I'm not doing anything wrong." Yet her words fell on deaf ears. The officer showed no sign of backing down, his posture rigid and unwavering. The wooden box lay forgotten on the hood of the car, its contents irrelevant now compared to the mounting tension between law enforcement and the terrified woman standing before them. In that moment, Maya realized something profound. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger than one traffic stop, bigger than one accusation or misunderstanding. This was about power, perception, and the deeply ingrained fears that often dictated how people interacted with authority figures. And as she stood there, hands raised and heart pounding, she understood that the choices she made in the next few seconds could alter the course of her life forever. The night air grew heavier with anticipation, thick with the promise of conflict. Neighbors peered cautiously through curtains, drawn by the commotion outside. Cars slowed as they passed, drivers craning their necks to catch a glimpse of what was happening. The once quiet suburb had transformed into a stage for a drama none of its residents could have predicted. For Maya, there was no turning back now. Whatever happened next would define not only her fate, but also the narrative that unfolded in the days and weeks to come. As the standoff continued, the line between right and wrong, fear and courage, began to blur. And in that uncertain space, Maya prepared herself for whatever came next, knowing full well that survival might demand more strength than she ever imagined she possessed. The air was thick with tension, so heavy it felt like it could suffocate anyone caught in its grip. Maya stood frozen, her hands raised high above her head, palms open and trembling slightly. Her chest heaved as she struggled to breathe evenly. But the weight of the moment pressed down on her, making every breath feel shallow and forced. The officer's gun remained pointed at her, unwavering, his finger hovering dangerously close to the trigger. Every shout from him echoed in her ears, sharp and commanding, leaving no room for negotiation or explanation. In that split second, time seemed to slow down. Maya's mind raced faster than ever before, piecing together fragments of thoughts and instincts that had been drilled into her over years of hearing stories about encounters like this one. She thought about her kids, her little boy who depended on the medication in that wooden box, her daughter who loved bedtime stories and warm hugs. What would happen to them if she didn't make it home tonight? Would they understand why their mom never came back? Her fingers twitched involuntarily, still gripping nothing but air where her phone had fallen. But then another reflex kicked in, one rooted deep in survival. Years ago, after hearing countless warnings about safety, she'd decided to carry a firearm legally, tucked safely inside her purse. It wasn't because she wanted trouble. It was because she wanted protection. And now, in this moment, with adrenaline coursing through her veins and fear clouding her judgment, she reached instinctively for it. The sound of the first gunshot shattered the stillness of the night like an explosion. It didn't come from the officer's weapon, it came from hers. Maya fired blindly, driven by panic and terror, unsure if she was aiming or simply reacting. The bullet missed its mark, embedding itself harmlessly in the pavement, but the damage was already done. Chaos erupted instantly. Backup officers sprang into action, drawing their own weapons and shouting orders that blended into a cacophony of noise. More shots rang out, each one piercing the quiet neighborhood like thunderclaps. Bullets zipped past Maya, shattering her car windows and embedding themselves in the metal frame. Glass rained down around her, glittering shards scattering across the asphalt. The world became a blur of flashing lights, deafening gunfire, and sheer terror. Maya dropped to the ground instinctively, diving behind the relative cover of her car. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. Each breath came in ragged gasps as she tried to process what was happening. This couldn't be real, it had to be some kind of nightmare. Just moments ago, she'd been driving home, thinking about dinner and homework. Now, she was crouched on the cold, hard pavement, fighting for her life. As the chaos unfolded, Officer Lisa Ramirez, the backup officer who had hung back earlier, watched in horror. She hadn't expected things to escalate this quickly. Her training told her to follow protocol, to prioritize safety and de-escalation, but the situation spiraled out of control too fast for anyone to intervene. Ramirez shouted desperately for everyone to stand down, her voice cutting through the chaos like a lifeline. "Cease fire! Stand down!" She screamed, waving her arms wildly in an attempt to regain control, but the momentum of violence was relentless. Another officer fired off a round, narrowly missing Maya as she scrambled further behind the car. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off the vehicle, creating a terrifying symphony of destruction. Neighbors peeked cautiously through their curtains, phones in hand, recording the scene while others called 911 again, pleading for help. The peaceful suburb had transformed into a war zone, its tranquility shattered in mere minutes. For Maya, survival became the only thing that mattered. She hugged the ground tightly, shielding her body with her arms as best she could. Pain shot through her side. A bullet had grazed her, tearing through skin and muscle, but she barely registered it. Adrenaline numbed the injury, keeping her focused on staying alive. Blood seeped through her shirt, warm and sticky, but she ignored it, knowing that stopping now meant certain death. The gunfire eventually slowed, though the silence that followed was almost as deafening as the noise had been. Smoke lingered in the air, mingling with the smell of burnt rubber and shattered glass. Maya lay motionless, clutching her wounded side, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she fought to steady her breathing. Her ears rang from the barrage of shots and her vision blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. She didn't know whether she was safe yet or if the danger was far from over. Officer Ramirez approached cautiously, her weapon lowered but still at the ready. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she assessed the scene. None of the officers appeared injured, though shock and disbelief were etched clearly on their faces. They looked at each other, searching for answers, but no words came. The gravity of what had just happened hung heavily in the air, unspoken, yet undeniable. When the dust finally settled, paramedics rushed to the scene, their sirens wailing in the distance. Maya was helped onto a stretcher, her body weak and trembling from both physical pain and emotional trauma. As they loaded her into the ambulance, she glanced back at her car, one bullet hole after another marring its surface. It was more than just a vehicle now. It was a symbol of everything she had endured that night. Neighbors gathered cautiously behind police tape, whispering among themselves as news spread like wildfire. Some expressed sympathy for Maya, horrified by what they'd witnessed. Others voiced anger and frustration, questioning how such a routine stop could spiral so violently out of control. Social media lit up within minutes, with videos of the shootout circulating online, accompanied by heated debates about justice, accountability, and systemic issues within law enforcement. Back at the hospital, doctors worked tirelessly to treat Maya's injuries. The graze wound on her side required stitches, but otherwise she was incredibly lucky. Against all odds, she had survived. Yet the emotional scars ran deeper than any physical injury ever could. Lying in the sterile hospital bed, surrounded by machines beeping softly, Maya replayed the events of the night over and over in her mind. Had she made the right decision? Could she have handled it differently? These questions haunted her, refusing to let her rest. Meanwhile, investigators began piecing together what had happened. Dashcam footage and bodycam recordings painted a complicated picture. The original officer's aggressive demeanor was evident, as was Maya's visible fear and confusion. Legal experts weighed in, debating whether her actions constituted self-defense or reckless endangerment. Activists seized the opportunity to highlight broader issues, pointing out the disproportionate number of black individuals killed during traffic stops and calling for sweeping reforms for Willow Creek, a community known for its quiet charm and tight-knit residents. The incident left an indelible mark. Conversations once reserved for private settings spilled into public forums, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about race, power, and trust. Parents worried about their children's safety, wondering how they could prepare them for a world where even mundane interactions carried hidden dangers. And as dawn broke over the horizon, casting soft golden light over the remnants of the chaotic night, Maya stared out the window of her hospital room. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her, but beneath it all, a flicker of determination burned brightly. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead: charges, court appearances, public scrutiny, but she vowed to fight for herself, for her family, and for the countless others whose stories had gone unheard. This wasn't just her battle anymore. It was part of something much bigger. The days following the shootout felt like a whirlwind, a storm that refused to settle. News of the incident spread faster than anyone could have anticipated, igniting heated conversations not just in Willow Creek but across the country. The small suburban town, once known for its quiet streets and friendly neighbors, became the center of national attention overnight. Reporters descended on the area, setting up cameras and microphones outside Maya's home, at the hospital where she was recovering, and even near the intersection where the chaos had unfolded. Everyone wanted answers, but no one seemed to agree on what those answers should be. For Maya, waking up each morning felt surreal. Her body ached from the graze wound on her side, and the emotional toll weighed even heavier. She spent hours staring at the ceiling of her hospital room, replaying the events of that night over and over in her mind. Each time she asked herself the same questions. Could she have done something differently? Should she have stayed still instead of reaching for her purse? Was firing her weapon truly self-defense, or had fear clouded her judgment? The uncertainty gnawed at her, making it hard to sleep or eat. Her family rallied around her, providing support in ways that only loved ones could. Her husband sat by her bedside, holding her hand tightly, his face etched with worry but also determination. He promised her they would get through this together, no matter how tough things got. Their children visited when allowed, though they were too young to fully understand what had happened. They hugged her gently, asking when she'd come home, their innocent questions breaking her heart even as they reminded her why she needed to stay strong outside the hospital walls. Public opinion was divided. Social media buzzed with hashtags and debates. Some people called Maya a hero, praising her for standing up against what they saw as police aggression. Others criticized her harshly, accusing her of escalating the situation unnecessarily. She shouldn't have pulled out a gun, some argued. What did she expect would happen? Meanwhile, activists seized the opportunity to highlight systemic issues within law enforcement, pointing out patterns of disproportionate violence against black individuals during routine interactions. Body cam footage released days later added fuel to the fire. In grainy video clips, viewers watched as the original officer approached Maya's car with an intimidating demeanor. His tone grew increasingly aggressive as he accused her of carrying drugs, a claim Maya denied repeatedly. The moment when he lunged toward her vehicle, hand hovering near his holster, sent chills down many spines. Legal experts debated whether Maya's perception of danger was reasonable given the circumstances. To some, her decision to fire her weapon seemed justified. To others, reckless. As the legal process began, Maya faced multiple charges, including attempted murder of a police officer. The weight of these accusations crushed her spirit temporarily, but she refused to give up. Her lawyer, a seasoned advocate familiar with cases involving self-defense claims, assured her that they had a fighting chance. "This isn't just about you anymore," he told her during one of their meetings. "It's about setting a precedent." showing the world that fear doesn't justify unnecessary force, but neither does it mean someone deserves to die. Support poured in from unexpected places. A crowdfunding campaign launched by local activists raised thousands of dollars to cover Maya's legal fees. Strangers sent letters of encouragement, sharing their own stories of encounters with law enforcement that had left them shaken. Community leaders organized rallies demanding accountability not just for Maya, but for all victims of police misconduct. Protest signs read phrases like "justice over fear" and "protect our families," drawing attention to the broader issue of systemic inequality, but not everyone stood behind Maya. Critics pointed to her possession of a firearm, arguing that carrying a weapon increased the likelihood of violence. If she hadn't brought a gun into the situation, one commentator wrote, none of this would have happened. Supporters countered that Maya had every right to protect herself, especially given the context of racial profiling and excessive force. They highlighted statistics showing how often black drivers ended up injured or worse during traffic stops, emphasizing that Maya's actions weren't isolated but part of a larger pattern. The trial itself became a spectacle, drawing crowds to the courthouse daily. Inside, tensions ran high as witnesses took the stand. Officers recounted the events of that night, their testimonies painting conflicting pictures of who was responsible for escalating the confrontation. Officer Lisa Ramirez, the backup officer who had tried to intervene, described feeling uneasy about the original officer's behavior, noting his unusually hostile approach. Her words resonated with jurors, adding complexity to the narrative. Maya testified as well, her voice steady despite the nerves threatening to overwhelm her. She spoke candidly about her fear, her confusion, and her desperation to survive. When asked why she reached for her gun, she replied simply, "I thought I was going to die." Her honesty struck a chord with many in the courtroom, humanizing her struggle in a way that cold facts and figures never could. Even the judge, typically stoic, seemed moved by her vulnerability. Throughout the proceedings, expert witnesses weighed in, offering insights into use of force policies, psychological responses to perceived threats, and the history of racial bias in policing. One psychologist explained how adrenaline can distort perception, causing people to act impulsively in life-or-death situations. Another criminologist discussed the disproportionate number of black individuals killed during traffic stops, urging the jury to consider the broader societal implications of their verdict. As closing arguments approached, anticipation reached a fever pitch. Would Maya walk free, vindicated by the law? Or would she face consequences for defending herself in a system stacked against her? Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered, holding candles and singing songs of hope. Activists delivered impassioned speeches, reminding everyone present that this case wasn't just about one woman, it was about justice for all marginalized communities. When the jury finally returned with their decision, the courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to the foreman as he stood to deliver the verdict. "Not guilty," he announced, citing self-defense as the determining factor. Relief washed over Maya, followed quickly by tears. For the first time since that fateful night, she allowed herself to believe she might actually survive this ordeal, not just physically, but emotionally and legally. The verdict sparked mixed reactions nationwide. Supporters celebrated, hailing it as a victory for civil rights and self-defense laws. Critics expressed frustration, warning that such outcomes could encourage vigilantism. But amidst the noise, one truth remained clear: Maya's story had forced the nation to confront uncomfortable realities about race, power, and survival. It wasn't just her battle anymore, it was part of a much larger fight for change for Willow Creek. The trial marked both an ending and a beginning. Conversations once whispered behind closed doors now took place openly in community meetings and forums. Residents grappled with difficult questions about trust, accountability, and reform. Parents taught their children new lessons about navigating a world fraught with hidden dangers. And Maya, though scarred by the experience, emerged stronger, determined to turn her pain into purpose. The verdict was a turning point, but it didn't bring closure, at least not the kind Maya had hoped for. Walking out of the courthouse that day felt surreal. Cameras flashed in her face, reporters shouted questions she couldn't answer, and strangers reached out to touch her arm or offer words of encouragement. Some called her brave. Others whispered prayers under their breath. But as much as Maya appreciated the support, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The scars, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal. In the weeks that followed, life slowly began to return to some semblance of normalcy, though nothing felt quite the same. Maya's family tried to rebuild their routines, focusing on small moments of joy, bedtime stories with the kids, meals shared around the table, quiet evenings spent watching movies together. But even in those peaceful moments, the shadow of what happened lingered. Her children noticed changes too, the way she flinched at sudden noises, how she avoided driving alone at night, or the long silences when she thought no one was looking. They were too young to fully understand, but they could sense her pain. Maya herself struggled to adjust. Physically, she recovered well from her injury, though a faint scar remained along her side, a permanent reminder of that chaotic night. Emotionally, however, the wounds ran deeper. She often found herself replaying the trial in her mind, reliving every testimony, every question posed by lawyers, every moment of judgment passed by jurors. Even though the jury had ruled in her favor, doubts still crept in. Was she really justified in firing her weapon? Could she have handled things differently? These thoughts haunted her, making sleep elusive and peace even harder to find. Her husband stood by her through it all, offering unwavering support. He encouraged her to talk about her feelings, reminding her that bottling them up would only make things worse. Sometimes, late at night, they'd sit together on the couch, holding hands without saying a word. Other times, he pushed her to open up, gently coaxing her to share her fears and frustrations. "You're not alone in this," he'd say, his voice steady despite the worry in his eyes. "We'll get through it together." But there were parts of her life that couldn't simply go back to the way they were before. Returning to work proved especially challenging. After weeks away from the hospital, Maya discovered that her nursing license had been suspended due to missed shifts during her recovery. Losing her job wasn't just a financial blow, it stripped away a core part of her identity. Being a nurse had always given her purpose, a chance to care for others and make a difference. Without it, she felt lost, unsure of who she was outside of the roles of mother, wife, and survivor. Determined not to let despair consume her, Maya turned to advocacy. She started speaking publicly about her experience, sharing her story at community meetings, rallies, and online platforms. At first, standing in front of crowds terrified her. Memories of the traffic stop flooded back each time someone asked her to recount the events of that night. But as she spoke more, she realized her voice carried power. Not just for herself, but for countless others who had faced similar struggles. People listened intently, nodding along as she described the fear, the confusion, and the fight for survival. Many approached her afterward, thanking her for putting into words what they couldn't express themselves. Through advocacy, Maya found a new sense of purpose. She joined forces with local organizations pushing for police reform, working tirelessly to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she went through. She advocated for better training for officers, increased accountability measures, and greater transparency in law enforcement practices. Her efforts inspired others to join the cause, transforming grief into action and anger into hope. Willow Creek itself underwent a transformation. The town, once defined by its quiet charm, became a hub for conversations about race, policing, and justice. Community leaders organized workshops and forums, inviting residents to discuss uncomfortable truths and brainstorm solutions. Schools incorporated lessons on civil rights and systemic inequality into their curriculums, teaching children the importance of empathy and understanding. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves now engaged in meaningful dialogue, determined to create a safer, fairer environment for everyone, yet not everyone embraced change willingly. Resistance lingered, particularly among those who believed Maya's actions set a dangerous precedent. Critics argued that allowing individuals to use firearms against law enforcement undermined authority and endangered lives. Online debates raged on, with opinions clashing fiercely. For every person praising Maya as a symbol of resilience, another condemned her as reckless or irresponsible. Despite the backlash, Maya refused to stay silent. She understood that progress often came with pushback, and she was willing to face criticism if it meant sparking real change. "I'm not perfect," she admitted during one speech. "I made mistakes, and I'll carry the weight of that night for the rest of my life. But none of us should have to live in fear of something as simple as a traffic stop. We deserve better than that." Her message resonated deeply, inspiring people far beyond Willow Creek. Media outlets picked up her story, amplifying her call for reform. Documentaries, podcasts, and articles explored the complexities of her case, shedding light on broader issues within the criminal justice system. Activists across the country cited her as an example of courage and determination, proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, ordinary people could spark extraordinary change. For Maya, healing remained an ongoing process. She learned to forgive herself for the choices she made that night, recognizing that survival instinct isn't something to be ashamed of. Therapy helped her unpack the trauma, teaching her coping mechanisms to manage anxiety and flashbacks. Slowly but surely she began to reclaim pieces of herself, the nurse, the mother, the fighter, and piece them back together into a stronger whole. Her family adapted alongside her. Her husband took on extra shifts at work to cover their expenses, while her kids adjusted to having a mom who sometimes needed quiet time to recharge. They rallied around her, celebrating small victories like completing a therapy session or delivering a powerful speech at a rally. Together, they built a new normal, one rooted in resilience and love. Years later, Maya looked back on that fateful night with a mix of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the life-altering ordeal she endured, and gratitude for the strength it forced her to discover. The scars remained, both visible and invisible, but so did the lessons. She had learned the value of speaking up, of fighting for justice, and of finding purpose in pain. Most importantly, she had shown her children and the world that even in the darkest moments, hope could shine through. Willow Creek never forgot the woman who stood her ground and sparked a movement. Streets that once stood silent now echoed with voices demanding change. Conversations that once simmered beneath the surface now flowed freely, shaping a brighter future for generations to come. And Maya, though forever changed by the events of that night, emerged as a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of courage, resilience, and the unyielding human spirit.